Good evening, I'm Andrew Chang. Adrienne is away. Tonight, horror and condemnation as the picture of what Russian soldiers left behind in Bucha becomes clear.
What's happening in Bucha is outrageous, and everyone's seen it.
Our CBC News team is there as the world reacts to the slaughter of civilians in Ukraine.
These acts of terrors won't go unpunished.
Plus, the worry this could torch already troubled peace talks. Also, a new report says it's now or never to stop catastrophic global warming.
We are on a fast track to climate disaster.
The world's top climate scientists issue a new, shorter timeline, but there's hope too. We break it down. One of Twitter's more controversial users now owns a majority share. And the moment this Canadian artist found out, he'd just won a Grammy.
I tell you, that was the most surreal moment of my life, I think.
This is The National. Out of the horrors left behind in Bucha, Ukraine, when Russian troops pulled out, anger is rising. Outrage against Russia building. We're going to show you images tonight that are disturbing, graphic, but they are also important because they show the reality of this war. These are some of them. Bodies found strewn in the Kiev suburb, some on the streets, others in shallow or mass graves. And the dead appear to be civilians. The destruction is wider than that. But even after weeks of horror stories, it is those deaths that are prompting new action now. It came today from the international community through sanctions, the expulsion of Russian diplomats, and allegations of war crimes. Meanwhile, inside the country, Ukraine's president went to see the scene himself. Margaret Evans takes us there.
Ukraine's wartime leader, clearly determined to hold the world's gaze on the suffering of his people, visiting Bucha in person. No longer known as a sleepy commuter town, but as the site of alleged atrocities by Russia's retreating army. Volodymyr Zelensky called it genocide. You can see what happened, he said. We know of thousands of people killed and tortured with severed limbs, raped women, murdered children. This is genocide. The cloak on what the outside world could see of Russia's occupation of Bucha and nearby areas was lifted over the weekend after Ukraine declared it had recaptured territory. What it revealed has shocked the world. Bodies, seemingly of civilians, lying in the streets. We came across this man by the side of the road yesterday, his shopping bag beside him. A mass grave has been reported in a churchyard, and the bodies of 5 men who apparently died with their hands tied behind their backs were found in a basement, brought up into the sunlight today. Ill-kept secrets are also being revealed in other towns and villages the Russians have left. This image shows a shallow grave in Motazhin, south and west of Bucha. 3 of the bodies have been identified as those of the village mayor, her husband, and her son. It's not clear what impact the revelations will have on peace negotiations already failing. It's very difficult to talk when you see what they did here, Volodymyr Zelensky said in Bucha. From the Ukrainian foreign minister today, there was a warning that the disturbing scenes unveiled in the liberated areas near Kyiv are but a drop in the bucket compared to other cities under attack.
And I can tell you without an exaggeration, but with great sorrow, that the situation in Mariupol is much worse compared to what we've seen in Bucha and other cities, towns and villages nearby Kyiv.
He also warned that no one should be in any doubt that Russia is now regrouping.
Okay, Margaret, so let's pick up there. What do we know about Russia's movements now?
Well, Andrew, analysts will tell you that they think about 2/3 of the Russian forces that were, just last week stationed around Kyiv, the capital, are now up in Belarus and being refitted, regrouping. They think that what's going to happen is that there's going to be a bigger push to the east. A lot of people thought at the beginning of the invasion that that's actually what Russia intended to do anyway, to create a land corridor between Crimea, which it, of course, annexed in 2014, and those breakaway pro-Russian republics in the Donbass region, which Russia has recognized. So to kind of put a territorial grouping together. But basically, people think that what the Russians are doing now is regrouping, getting ready to go for a bigger push to the east, where they have been more successful during this campaign.
Okay, Margaret Evans in Kyiv tonight. Thank you. And as global fury rose today, so too did calls for accountability. Here's Cameron McIntosh with the push to prosecute Russia's leader for war crimes.
One comment to make before I start the day.
Arriving in Washington, speaking for the first time since the deaths in Bucha came to light, President Biden not holding back.
You may remember I got criticized for calling Putin a war criminal.
Now Biden is calling for Vladimir Putin to be tried like one.
And we have to gather all the detail so this can be have a war crime trial. This guy is brutal.
Similar calls across Europe today as leaders condemn the deaths. The United Kingdom said it will work with the International Court.
We're putting funding in. We've got the Metropolitan Police investigating those war crimes so the perpetrators can be brought to justice.
These are clearly war crimes.
Canada pledged help too, as it announced more sanctions.
And it is important for Canada to play its role in making sure that there is accountability for these acts.
But whether Putin or any other Russian authority could even be brought to trial is a very open question. It's unclear what a trial would even look like.
We have to consult with our allies and partners on what makes most sense as a mechanism moving forward. There's work to be done to work out the specifics of that.
Russia's foreign minister called the accusations lies and fakes. He wants the UN Security Council to deal with Ukrainian provocations. Ukraine's president says he'll address the UN tomorrow. Meanwhile, Biden is promising more weapons and a harder line.
I'm going to continue to add sanctions. Thank you. I'll let you know.
The White House also said not only does it expect the fighting to get worse, that Russia could actually take territory in eastern Ukraine, potentially bringing with it more atrocities. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Washington.
A group of international scientists say the world has to act now or never to prevent a climate disaster. Scientists have been talking about this target for years, 1.5 degrees. That's what we need to hold global warming to by the end of this century to avoid a catastrophic future. But today, we got a new deadline. A new report says in order to hit that target, carbon emissions must peak by 2025 and fall rapidly after that. Otherwise, the climate could warm by 3 degrees, bringing an unprecedented heat waves, terrifying storms, and widespread water shortages. Stephen D'Souza shows us solutions the report says we already have.
At this manufacturing plant in Burnaby, workers hope the technology they're developing could help Canada reach its climate goals.
Over the next decade, we want to be one of the companies that enables up to 1 billion tons annually of CO2 captured or removed.
His company creates carbon capture and storage systems. Instead of carbon spewing out of a smokestack, it's sent through pipes into a system where filters absorb the CO2. But large-scale removal is still years away. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warns efforts like that must be accelerated, and dependence on fossil fuels has to be rapidly reduced. Otherwise, there could be devastating impacts across the planet, from severe weather to drought. The UN Secretary General was blunt in his assessment.
Some government and business leaders are saying one thing but doing another. Simply put, they are lying. And the results will be catastrophic. This is a climate emergency.
The report warns that to reach climate goals, governments will have to leave valuable oil and gas projects in the ground. A difficult challenge, says a federal environment minister.
I think our Our work as a government and as a responsible government is to ensure that the transition happens as smoothly as possible.
One tool companies like this in BC are eagerly awaiting, a tax credit for carbon capture programs, expected in this week's federal budget.
It's a critical part of decarbonizing the energy system and the industrial emissions in time to meet our climate goals.
But critics say those systems only prolong dependence on fossil fuels.
It's clear that these are dangerous distractions, and betting on them is essentially gambling with our lives.
So while the consensus of scientists on what needs to be done is clear, the path there is still far from simple. Stephen D'Souza, CBC News, Toronto.
Now let's bring in CBC News senior meteorologist Johanna Wagstaff, who has covered the climate story extensively for us. Johanna, this report, it does spend a lot of time on solutions, right? So what stood out for you?
Well, Andrew, this report is essentially a handbook on how to tackle climate change. It offers dozens of different pathways to get there. All of them, though, we have to act fast. The report found that we have just 3 years for emissions to peak. Something that I found interesting, for the first time ever, the authors assessed human habits and looked at climate policies that are working, and found that mass-scale habitual changes, things like reduction in food waste, could cut emissions 40 to 70% by 2050 while improving well-being. Ultimately, though, even with all of these factors, the bottom line is that coal must be effectively phased out if the world is to stay within 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Right, and all within such a tight timeline, as you mentioned, right? So Joe, do you see some hope in all of this? Because I'm hoping you see some hope in all of this.
I do, Andrew. So right now, the world's current pledges have warming closer to a catastrophic 3 degrees by the end of this century. But I saw how the first report in this series informed the agreement that 195 countries signed last November in Glasgow. And written in that final pledge, the world agreed to meet again in Egypt in 8 months and come up with their strongest and essentially final commitments. And this is the report that the world will make those pledges on. And every single one of those 195 countries, Andrew, agreed on what was in the report today.
Senior meteorologist Johanna Wagstaff, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Well, today, Ontario Premier Doug Ford hailed a huge investment to help the province become a major hub for electric vehicle production.
With General Motors committing $1.8 billion to retool their plants in Oshawa and Ingersoll, we'll bring pickup truck production to Oshawa and electric commercial vehicle production to Ingersoll.
The federal and Ontario governments will top that up with another $259 million each. Ingersoll will host Canada's first all-electric GM assembly plant, making the Bright Drop electric commercial van, while retooling the Oshawa plant is expected to bring 2,600 jobs by adding a third shift to make Chevy Silverados. BC Premier John Horgan tested positive for COVID this morning. He announced the news on Twitter, saying his symptoms are mild and that he will continue to isolate and work from home. The 62-year-old recently underwent treatment for throat cancer, which does put him at a higher risk for more serious outcomes of COVID-19. Well, today, these familiar towers in the heart of Toronto were part of a rebound from COVID. Many private and public sector workers went back to the office in that big transition that so many of us are trying to manage. But Katie Nicholson shows us confidence is shaky for some.
Steve Miller's marketing agency renovated its office to make it more COVID safe.
You can still feel a little like you're sealed in here and away from the others if you still have some trepidation.
He's eager for more staff to be able to get together in person.
Being able to sort of, riff off each other, some of that just comes a little more naturally in person.
Despite the renovations and a drawer full of rapid tests, the rest of the staff is a little hesitant.
We still have a fair number of people working from home.
In downtown Toronto, where Ontario public servants and a lot of the financial district return to office life, mixed feelings.
I feel really comfortable. It's about time that we get back to normal.
It's a little bit stressful because, some people are taking GO trains, some people on the TTC. You never know what people are going to pick up.
COVID testing is much less robust than it was, but hospitalizations are up 30% from the previous week. Still, the Premier is confident no further action is needed.
Our hospitals are in good shape right now. We expected a little spike.
This doctor isn't so confident.
I would say in the past few weeks, many healthcare providers are off. they're sick, and a lot of healthcare providers are burnt out. And so, you know, I would say to Premier Ford that people are really struggling, and you may not have the staffing.
Staffing and staff comfort, Steve Miller's chief concern.
If the numbers continue to rise, and if we see this wave become sort of one of a tidal nature, we might sort of do a little pulse check on the agency and just get a gut check on how people are feeling about coming in. But it's opened up.
And wait a little longer until they can riff on ideas in person.
I think it's going to be something that
Katie Nicholson, CBC News, Toronto.
Ontario's police watchdog has closed its investigation into this incident during the convoy protests in Ottawa. Now, this dramatic video was widely shared in February, fueling false rumors, including that the woman had died. In fact, she was helped to her feet and suffered a minor injury to her shoulder. The Special Investigations Unit says that was not enough to warrant further investigation. And today, a sentence came down for a tragic case that caught national attention last year. But there's no resolution for those involved. A family lost their 2 young children, killed in a crash. Behind the wheel, a teenage driver. Ali Chiasson brings us the scene outside the courthouse today.
Outside court, the Chowdhury family shares their tragic story, showing just how quickly life can change.
The 5 of us were in our comfort zone in our front yard of our home. We were at ease. We felt safe. We heard a speeding car and immediately saw it flying into our 2 children and neighbor.
The crash shocked their Vaughan, Ontario community. Symbols of mourning dotted the quiet suburb after their deaths.
Our beautiful Anaya, so full of passion, courage, and determination, died from her injuries. Our little loving, spunky 4-year-old Jax also lost his life due to his injuries.
The 16-year-old driver was speeding down the residential street, going 102 kilometers an hour. The children's father is struggling to accept this new reality.
I have to accept the devastation on my family, and I have to accept the laws that protect the guilty.
The now 17-year-old driver has been sentenced to 1 year in open custody, followed by 6 months of community supervision and a 6-year driving ban. In court, the judge said he seemed remorseful.
This is not a light sentence. This young man's going into custody.
While there is no sentence that could possibly ease the Chowdhury's pain, defense attorney Andrew Vaughan says the sentence is fair.
Well, the Youth Criminal Justice Act takes into account that young people's brains are not fully developed, they're not fully cognitively developed. And so we, as much as we want to hold them responsible, I think the sentence does that.
The family is trying to turn their grief into advocacy for safer streets.
We ask you as a greater community to do your part in honoring not only the lives of our children, but all those who have lost their lives to reckless driving.
This is what we lost. This is what you guys lost. This is what the world lost.
Ali Chiasson, CBC News, Toronto.
Well, police in California have arrested a suspect in connection with a shooting that killed 6 people and left another 12 hurt yesterday in Sacramento. Gunfire erupted in the wee hours as crowds were streaming out of closing bars. Police have said multiple shooters were involved. Well, turning now to a dramatic day for social media giant Twitter and one of its fiercest critics, tech billionaire Elon Musk. He has now become Twitter's largest shareholder following a multi-billion-dollar stock purchase. And all this just days after the world's richest man mused about creating his own social media platform. Here's Nisha Patel.
Elon Musk is taking an old saying to a new level. Put your money where your mouth is, spending nearly $3 billion to buy up 9% of Twitter. In this clip from a past interview, Musk shared what he liked about the platform.
I kind of need some means of getting a message out.
Social media platforms are a key source of news, information, and entertainment. And so that's sort of the new sandbox where entrepreneurs want to play.
Founder and CEO of electric car giant Tesla and aerospace firm SpaceX, Musk is one of Twitter's most high-profile users.
Ladies and gentlemen, Elon Musk!
He's got more than 80 million followers.
I think if I just posted that on Twitter,
I'd be fine.
But he's also one of its most controversial users, from using it to pump questionable cryptocurrencies to a tweet about taking Tesla private at a fixed share price. That eventually saw him step down as chair of the company.
So why would Elon Musk do this?
Look, I mean, this has really been building for Musk. This is the first step toward him driving significant change at Twitter.
Just 2 weeks ago, Musk polled his followers asking, "Free speech is essential to a functioning democracy. Do you believe Twitter rigorously adheres to this principle? Please vote carefully."
Maybe the end game is acquiring the company outright. It would be a much easier endeavor to take than kind of starting something up from scratch.
So, some experts say Musk could change the tone of Twitter.
Enable not just what we consider free speech to circulate, but like a lot of problematic forms of content.
He goes down a direction, usually goes aggressively, dives into the deep end of the pool. That's the view of what he's going to do with Twitter.
Musk hasn't said anything publicly about his intentions, but he is known for making big moves. Nisha Patel, CBC News, Toronto.
Many journalists have been forced to flee Russia or face jail time for their reporting. Next, their determination to report the truth despite the risk.
This letter from Moscow police, this is...
When did you get that?
Today.
Plus, with COVID cases on the rise again, what's the risk of getting long COVID?
Everyone seems to know somebody that has chronic symptoms after COVID.
And a very Canadian way to find out you just won a Grammy.
I tell you, that was the most surreal moment of my life, I think.
We're back in 2. Journalists in Russia are facing increasing risk. More than 150 journalists have left in recent weeks out of concern over the new laws that threaten to put them in jail for publishing anything that the Kremlin considers to be fake news. As Briar Stewart shows us, many are finding refuge in neighboring countries.
It's my flat.
Sergei Smirnov apologizes for the disarray in his apartment. In the past month, his entire life has been turned upside down. He fled Russia, and so did most of his independent news outlet, Mediazona.
Our team in Georgia, in Lithuania, and Turkey, and Armenia.
Smirnov came to Vilnius, Lithuania's capital, because he wants to freely report on what Russia's military is doing without the fear of going to jail. But his family couldn't join him. His infant son doesn't yet have a passport.
I fear about my family because search, because pressure on Russian, and We no have defense about repression from Russia government, absolutely.
Russia has passed new punishing media laws where it's a crime to describe what's happening in Ukraine as a war or invasion. Anyone accused of publishing fake news can face up to 15 years in jail. The only acceptable narrative is the government one. In the past few weeks, more than 150 journalists have left Russia. Dmitry Semenov spoke to a few of them. The journalist used to be a political activist in Russia and fled to Lithuania 4 years ago. It's obvious that Russia is turning rapidly, if it has not already turned into North Korea, he said. I would advise everyone who has the opportunity to leave, although there are very few opportunities for such people now. And even if they flee, it doesn't mean they're off the government's radar. With so many journalists and activists settling here in Lithuania, the country's security services put out a warning saying that intelligence agencies in Belarus and Russia could step up surveillance of their citizens here. But the most vulnerable remain the ones who stayed in Russia. Last week, Novaya Gazeta, a publication whose editor won the Nobel Peace Prize last year, was forced to close after receiving a second warning from Russia's communications regulator. Before that, the paper was running blank pages as a way to show they were being censored.
That's why we prefer to publish nothing than official material.
Missing too from the paper were the images the deputy editor yearned to publish, like those of the destruction from Mariupol. These pictures from there seem to be the best words to me, she said. They can show the horror of what's happening and shout no to war.
To Lithuania.
Those working outside of Russia can report what they want, but it doesn't mean they're entirely out of the Kremlin's reach.
This letter from Moscow police, this is.
When did you get that?
Today.
Smirnov has just learned Russia has opened a criminal case against him for a tweet he put out more than a month ago related to the country's figure skaters.
It's a big problem for me.
Which is why he says he can't return. His family plans to move here soon and join him, along with the rest of those in a self-imposed exile in Lithuania. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Vilnius.
Well, millions of Ukrainians have been forced to flee the country and leave their homes and loved ones behind.
I lived with my boyfriend. He's still staying there, and I'm very scared what happened with him.
We'll hear from some who found safety here in Canada a little later. But first, as restrictions lift and infections rise, we look at the reality and the risk of developing long COVID. That's next. Welcome back. Starting today, the government is mailing out a survey to 100,000 Canadians over 18. They are anxious to get a clear picture of how many people suffer from long COVID. That's when debilitating symptoms simply don't go away. You're about to hear firsthand what that is like. Candice McCann is a long COVID patient in Toronto. Adrienne Patino, also living with long COVID, joining us from North Vancouver. And we have infectious diseases specialist Dr. Isaac Bogosh, also here in Toronto. Thank you to the three of you for joining us. Candice, I'd like to start with you. Can you share with us when you first realized that your COVID was long-haul COVID?
Sure. So when I initially had symptoms in March of 2020, COVID wasn't even on our radar. I hadn't traveled. I was showing mild symptoms. I went to the doctor and I seemed to recover quite quickly. I was able to continue on with my daily life and didn't think too much of it. It was a few months later when I was hit with the same symptoms, but much more severe, along with a host of other symptoms that affected my whole body and eventually couldn't work. It was then that I started to realize that it could have been related to COVID when I was hearing about other people with the same types of issues and symptoms.
And if we think back to March 2020, I mean, this was, long before the vaccine was available. How are you now?
Honestly, there hasn't been much improvement over that year and a half plus since I've had the long haul symptoms. I'm still struggling, extremely fatigued. My husband has to do all of the housework and the cooking. I'm still not back to work. It's been a long haul, as they say.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it. Adrienne, can I ask you the same questions? When you first realized that you had a much bigger problem on your hands than expected, and also how you're doing today?
Yes, I got sick in December 2020, and unlike Candice, unfortunately, I never actually recovered. It was, the doctor said, it's COVID, you should just let it run. 10 days, you'll be fine. And, 10 days went by and I wasn't improving. I was going at least twice a week to the ER because of my oxygen was low, my heart rate was through the roof. I couldn't even move. When the end of January hit and I was still very sick, like I knew obviously there was something very wrong and I didn't know what to do at that point.
And here we are a year and, several months later. Has your condition improved much, if at all, since then?
The only thing that's improved has been my lungs, because I've been doing daily lung therapy with a specialized COVID lung specialist. And it took me about 10 months, almost 11 months to be able to laugh without having a coughing fit.
Wow.
Other than that, everything else is the same. My cognitive function actually has been declining. My brain function, I've always had very bad brain fog, and now it's actual neurological damage that they detected. My brain function again is going down. My heart is still very bad. I still get 120, 160 heart rate out of the blue, and that's in 2 different medical medicines for the heart.
Wow. Dr. Bogosh, what do you think? A lot of people are going to be listening to both Candice and Adrienne in this age of variants and subvariants and thinking, could this happen to me? I mean, what's the answer?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously awful to hear, and we hear more and more stories like this, and everyone seems to know somebody that has chronic symptoms after COVID. One of the issues, of course, is the data that we have to date. And, this is being studied increasingly, but there's a lot of room for improvement in some of the clinical studies that we have. Some of the studies don't fully define the issue. There's limitations because some of the studies don't have control groups, or they have reporting biases, or there's a non-standardized definition of what long COVID is. But you've heard, of course, it's real, it's here.
Candice, how has your life changed?
It's changed almost 100%. My days are spent just managing symptoms. I can no longer exercise. I'm having issues with my legs. pain and muscle spasms. Like Adrienne said, I'm having cognitive issues as well, finding it very difficult to read and watch TV. So most of the day I just lie in bed. I can listen to audiobooks and that's it.
Candace, it strikes me that it's not every day that you have an opportunity to actually speak with an infectious diseases specialist. I'm curious, do you have a question for Dr. Bogosh?
I do. I'd love to know, is there hope for long haulers in the future? And how is the research going in Canada as far as trials for drugs and for treatment?
Yeah, there absolutely is. There is hope. And it's not just in Canada, it's around the world. I think it's increasingly recognized that long COVID is a serious problem. And as we heard at the very beginning, there's more attention paid toward this by both federal and provincial governments. And in fact, there are clinics popping up that are really geared to support individuals who are suffering from chronic symptoms following a COVID-19 infection.
Dr. Bogosh, a lot of folks in Canada are vaccinated, not once, but twice, even 3 times. Has that affected the incidence rate of long COVID?
Based on some of the limited data that we have to date, it does appear that vaccination significantly reduces the likelihood that someone is going to develop long COVID should they catch COVID-19. That's obviously a good thing.
Adrienne, I'd like to give you the final word here. What is it that you would like folks at home watching this to know, and what is your hope?
Well, first of all, I want them to know that this is a very serious issue. It can happen to absolutely anyone, not just on first infections. It can be on repeated infections. And it's not linked to general health or your age or anything like that. It can happen. I was 100% healthy, competitive swimmer. I'm young. I didn't have anything before. And I still can't work. Absolutely everything in our world has been turned upside down. And it can happen to anyone. And my hope is that more people are cautious. Just simple precautions, take care of yourself, take care of others, try to keep reasonable distance and take it seriously because you don't know what's going to happen to you.
Well, Adrienne, I'm listening, and I suspect many others are as well. We're going to leave it there. I think we could talk for a lot longer than this, but thank you so much. Candace, Adrienne, Dr. Bogosh, what a wonderful conversation, and I wish you well.
Thank you.
And next, a Ukrainian family finds safety here in Canada after fleeing the war.
I feel bad that I escaped, that I left my country.
Their fears for the loved ones they were forced to leave behind and the challenges they face now here in this country. After this. Welcome back. For weeks, we have been watching a mass exodus from Ukraine as people flee their homes, flee the war to find safety, including here in Canada. But tonight, some who have made the long journey say once they arrive, they're struggling to get help. And that is adding another layer to what is already a difficult time.
We don't know how to make our first steps in Canada. We read that there are lots of help, but we cannot find this help. Ukrainian women and children are very talented. We just need small help with first steps. My name is Sandy Tarasenko. I come from Ukraine with my colleague, my friend Victoria.
Oscar, I'm catching you!
And 3 kids. Ava is 11, Eli is 9, and Oscar is 3 years old. And I feel bad that I escaped, that I left my country. I worry about everyone, not only about my husband. But then I see how many kids died. I see how many schools are destroyed, kindergartens, hospital, kids' hospital. And I understand that nothing matters when something happened to your children.
My name is Victoria Perron. I am 24 years old.
I can help you, okay?
Sandy wanted to save her children, and I decided to help her with it. All the refugees made a very hard decision when they decided to leave their houses. No one wanted to go somewhere to find better life because we were happy in Ukraine and we built our future and we were waiting for something. We had our plans and now everything is destroyed. And we don't know what will happen tomorrow, and we don't know if we meet our loved ones, if we meet our family next day, and it's a terrible feeling. I can't even explain you. And I wish no one to feel the same like me. I lived with my boyfriend. He's still staying there, and I'm very scared what happened with him. And really, when I read news, when someone drops the bomb on Kyiv, I'm afraid that it could be my boyfriend in this place. My heart is breaking.
They are asking why daddy is not around, call daddy to come. They're a bit angry with daddy that he leave us. They're talking every day. I explain them, we have war, they understand it, but they are just kids. So we hope the war will be over. And when only my husband calls us, come back, everything is safe, we'll go back home.
To tell you the truth, I hope to come back home very soon because I miss my home very much. I want to go home. Sorry.
But for now, there are lots of paperwork. You can't take a job because you don't have apartment. You can't take apartment because you don't have job. Canada is not easy.
Since the fighting started in Ukraine, more than 4 million people have fled the country. Over half have gone to neighboring Poland. Romania, Moldova, and Hungary have also taken in many. But last month, Canada launched a special program to help Ukrainians come here. In 2 weeks, more than 91,000 applications were received and more than 14,000 approved. Well, Ontario is now the first province to legalize online gambling, but existing casinos complain the newcomers are getting a better deal.
It's not fair. We want to compete. We want iGaming. We want it to be a level playing field.
And that's not the only concern. We're back after this.
I'm Jamie Poisson, and tomorrow on CBC's daily news podcast, Front Burner, Liberal Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault went from eco-activist to politician. We take a closer look at his new climate plan. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Look at that, some wild pictures from Australia's iconic Bondi Beach. You can see it engulfed by tides as a storm system moves through. The famous strip of sand swallowed by giant waves. A rare sight, though still not scary enough to stop this surfer from catching a wave or two. Well, there's a new game in Ontario tonight, online gambling. It is the first province to legalize and tax these platforms. But as Philippe de Montigny shows us, there is concern that it could be too tempting for problem gamblers.
Ontario is hoping it's going to be a huge new revenue source, regulating and taxing the $1 billion online gambling industry. This Toronto startup offers virtual casino games and sports betting, one of the few homegrown operators now licensed and allowed to advertise legally.
We have a bit of a home court advantage, we feel, so it being that market is obviously critical for us.
Big global gambling sites like Bet365 and FanDuel are also joining the party, with hundreds of online games now certified by the provincial regulator. Now that they're legit, there's concern some Ontarians may not play within their limits.
Most people have a really bad understanding of random chance, and so they think, for example, if they keep playing, they're due to win.
Researchers say all the flashy ads and easy access may draw at-risk players.
With the increase in accessibility of gambling games in this way, there should also be an increase in accessibility of responsible gambling tools and services to these players.
Beyond passive measures like including links to addiction resources on their sites, FanDuel Canada says it's being proactive.
On our app, there are a lot of tools for players to be able to self-regulate around game bets, length of time, wager limits.
Licensed online operators are being taxed by Ontario 20% of their earnings, far less than brick-and-mortar casinos at 55%.
It's not fair. We want to compete. We want iGaming. We want it to be a level playing field.
Legalizing online betting in Ontario could draw some customers away from casinos. An industry report says that could result in hundreds of millions of dollars in lost tax revenue each year for Queen's Park. Philippe de Montigny, CBC News, Toronto.
Now, also being held online this week, the Canadian Screen Awards. Tonight, the Academy honored the best in broadcast news, and we do have some news that we're very proud to share.
And the Canadian Screen Award goes to CBC News, The National.
The National one for Best National Newscast. And our executive producer, Chad Paulin, accepted the award from our control room.
The studio, to the newsroom, to the field, the edit suite, and these days to the kitchen tables right across this country. So thank you so much to our incredible team. This honor really belongs to you.
One of the National's visual storytellers also honored. The award for Best Photography went to video producer Jean-François Bisson for this story about Ugandan guerrillas. And JF accepted the award from his hotel room in Ukraine, where he is covering the war.
Big shout out to my wife, Shelly. Thank you so much for everything. You're supporting me, allowing me to do what I do every day, my passion.
CBC News also won for coverage of the installation of Governor General Mary Simon. Other winners include our colleagues at the Fifth Estate, reporter Belle Puri, and CBC Vancouver host Anita Bath. Big congratulations to all of tonight's winners and nominees. And now to the moment another Canadian won a major award.
You don't know? You won! You won!
Imagine getting a life-changing phone call while driving through a snowstorm. Not this, definitely not a snowstorm there. Our moment is coming up next. Well, I think Alex Cuba would be smiling if he saw this video in this moment. He was driving, to be fair, when he became a Grammy Award winner for the Best Latin Pop Album of the Year. Just the circumstances were a little different. His publicist called him to break the good news, and the car erupted in excitement. He tells us all about it in our moment.
This past weekend, I was in the Okanagan performing with the Okanagan Symphony Orchestra, which is the reason why I didn't go to the Grammys. So I am driving back home from those shows, yesterday. With me, my partner, my wife, Sarah, and my youngest son, Owen. We went through a snowstorm. It was like back to winter, I'm like, oh my God. And I looked at the time and I thought that my category has already passed. Like 5 minutes after that, the phone rings. I had it connected to the Bluetooth in the car. So it made a huge noise. It was my publicist to tell me, what, you don't know? You won. Oh my God. It was an amazing moment. We started screaming in the car, It's like, oh my God. And I'm proud of myself because I didn't lose it. I kept driving straight. That was the most surreal moment of my life.
Indeed, I love that story. And so he says, this is a pretty meaningful moment for him because he recorded this album himself while he was in quarantine during the pandemic. So he's happy to see some good come out of it. He did drive for a little while longer and then pulled over, recorded some acceptance speeches, and then got back on the road. That's The National for this April 4th. Have a great night.